Hey guys, you're listening to episode 169 of the Finish Line podcast, where we discuss the intersection of faith, generosity, and personal finance. My name is Keelan, and I'm here with my co-host and brother Cody. Have you ever thought about how some of the scariest moments in life can set the stage for God's greatest work in us? Today's guest, David Schwartz, had all the signs of worldly success, but God got his attention in 2012 through 9 hours of major heart surgery. Since then, Dave's life has been turned upside down. Today, Dave leads a developing effort in Grand Bassa County, Liberia, where ground will soon be broken for the Agape Empowerment Center, a 15-acre campus designed to raise Christ-centered Liberian leaders through housing, education, and holistic care. If you've ever wondered what it's like to build a vision from scratch, this episode is for you. Before we get started, we've spent years speaking to and learning from some of the most passionate givers and leaders in the world. We've distilled down some of the most impactful frameworks, strategies, and tools into short weekly emails that leave you with practical ways you can take your generosity journey to the next level. If you aren't on the list already, you can sign up for free at finishlinepledge.com. And with that, let's get started. All right, we're here with Dave Schwartz. Dave, thanks so much for being with us.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate your time today.
So why don't you just start us off taking us back to your early years? What kind of a home did you grow up in, and how did you come to know Jesus?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I grew up in Dubuque, Iowa. I'm sure all of your listeners are familiar with that. It's a town of about 60,000 in eastern Iowa. Grew up in a traditional denominational family. I was the youngest of five with a single mom, and so we had no economic means whatsoever. Life was a bit challenging. We went to church every Sunday. I would suggest, and this isn't trying to fault anyone in my family, but I became a bit of a check-the-box Christian. Did all the right things as I grew older. Over time, just understood, you go sit in the same pew every Sunday, be friendly with the pastor, be social afterwards, and all is good, right? And then the other 6 days that really don't matter. So that was kind of the way I grew up. And again, it's not a slap at any of my family or my mom, who was certainly trying to do her best. And I think she knew Jesus, but probably in a different way, more of a denominational way.
So Dave, throughout your upbringing, how did you come to know Jesus personally?
I think it took a long time, quite frankly. Again, I followed the check-the-box routine for a lot of years, and I thought I was doing the right thing. Over time, I ran into some valleys in my life, and I think that started to change everything. Where suddenly you realized this, doing church, doing religion on a Sunday, and then doing your own thing the rest of the week, it's not working out very well. And I'm sure we'll get into a little bit more on the valleys, but that's a challenging existence, and it gives you a lot of room to make some really unfortunate decisions in your life. And so I'd suggest it took me almost half a century to become a true follower of Jesus.
Can you walk us through some of what that process looked like? What kind of experiences was God using or redeeming in that? And where did you really see that framework start to shift?
Yeah, I think by the grace of God, and I truly mean that, by the grace of God, my life did shift. I was unfortunately in a situation where I went through divorce. I had 2 open heart surgeries. I had a lot of material success. And so with material success, toys, country clubs became great options. And those became probably a little too important for me. And so consequently, I started going down that pathway. After going through the personal trauma that I did and laying in the hospital specifically in 2012, recovering from my second open heart surgery, I realized it was time to make a change. It was time to look at things differently. By the grace of God, a woman, my wife Chong, had come into my life. And she was different than anyone I'd ever met or been with in my past, in the sense that she had this faith journey going. She had this relationship going that was almost foreign to me, despite the fact that I was religious for the first 50 years of my life. I wanted what she had. And in discussions with her, in just being around her, just seeing the contentment that she had after being through valleys herself, I thought, I want a little bit of that. And so it really made me take the blinders off and start looking at what is a true relationship with our Savior versus a religious check the box.
So, Dave, up until that point, what did your career look like? You started to talk about some of the things that became appealing to you, like country clubs and those types of things, but what kind of work were you engaged in?
Yeah, I was blessed in many ways, overly blessed, and probably I underappreciated those blessings. I was an officer with a Fortune 500 company at a reasonably high level in the insurance and financial services industry. So I did that for about 25 years. A friend of mine and myself started another firm, a breakaway firm, if you will, that started with the two of us, and we grew it to 100 employees in 3 states with a lot of clients. And again, life was good if you define life was good by material items, by living that type of existence that you thought you had an overly inflated opinion of yourself. And I certainly fit that description.
And how did that start to shift as you started to have this personal encounter with Christ?
Yeah, it changed a lot. When I'm laying in the hospital back in 2012, I realized something has to change. I can't keep doing it this way. The second heart surgery, none of these were due to bad health habits or anything like that. I was just born with an issue that had to be resolved. Okay. But it captures your attention, especially the second one. I was on the operating table for 9 hours. And at a point, they couldn't put you on bypass. They had to, and I know I'm speaking to a physician here, so you'll probably get this. They had to cool my body down, and literally you're dead for like 30 minutes before they bring you back. I mentioned to my anesthesiologist after the fact, I think if you guys would have explained that better, I would have said no, because that just sounds horrible. But going through the recovery, just realized my life isn't nearly what maybe I've painted the picture to be. And now having this woman in my life, my eventual wife, who's living the type of life that I became envious of, it started to change everything. And as I started to change from religion to a relationship with Jesus, contentment started to creep into my life. And I had never really experienced that before. And so I made a break at that point. I sold my interest in the company that I had founded, got in the nonprofit business, ran a chamber for a couple of years, ran the YMCA of Greater Des Moines for a couple of years. And then I was about ready to ride off into the sunset, I thought. And I got a call from a guy at our church who handles the administrative duties here. And he said, "Would you ever want to work here?" And that sounded like a crazy concept to me. And I said, "Doing what?" And he said, "Running our missions program. You've got a lot of connectivity, and we think it'd just be a really natural fit for what you do." And I said, "I don't think so." And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, my dear wife and I absolutely love our church. It just happens to be recognized as the fastest growing church in America right now. We love it here, and I don't want to get behind the curtain and see something I don't love." And he understood that. He says, "But I'll tell you what, you won't." And here I'm 6 years later, still doing work at the church, and it's just been a dream job come true. Again, I'm blessed in so many ways that I shouldn't be blessed.
Yeah, it's funny how many stories we've heard of people responding with, "I think you got the wrong person here." And God has a funny way of working with that. I actually think he prefers it that way. So you've had quite a number of roles at this point, both in the commercial insurance industry and then in the nonprofit, even on the church side. But I know a lot of your focus in some of the recent years has been around Liberia. So where did that connection begin?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. So my wife Chong is a really interesting evangelical recruiter to Jesus Christ. And I say that with a smile on my face because Chong's originally from South Korea. And so she came to the U.S. when she was 14 years old, and she speaks in a bit of a broken English. I always kid people when they say, "Well, her English isn't very good." And I'll say, "Well, how's your Korean?" There's a reason for that. But anyhow, she's got this disarming way about her. And so we were in our church area where they serve meals before services, and we were going to have some breakfast shortly before a service. And all of a sudden she disappeared and came back to the table with about a 2-week-old infant who certainly didn't look like her or I. And I said, "Well, who is this?" And she says, "Well, it's Zachary. I just met his mom, and she happens to be from a country called Liberia." This was back in 2015. And I truly couldn't have picked out Liberia on a world map. I had no idea where it was. Started doing some research, but to make a long story reasonably short, young Austina, the mom, was a single mom. She just had this infant child, okay, and had a toddler with her also, Serena, and who was 2 years old. That family of three has now grown to about a family of seven who's become part of our family, our extended family. We don't look like the Brady Bunch in any stretch of the imagination, but it's an incredible addition to our family. But that's how we learned of Liberia. So fast forward in 2022, I'm doing missions work at our church, and I had the opportunity to go to Liberia. And I said to Chong, this is one you may want to come along with me just to see. We're going to vet a couple of prospective partners. And in my job doing missions here, I had the opportunity to vet hundreds of nonprofit organizations because we were a funder. And so it's kind of funny, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later, but that was God's way of starting to prepare for what was going to happen. In addition to the corporate experience, it was God's way of preparing me. So we went off to Liberia, and a couple things happened. I remember the date specifically. It was September 11th, 2022. And we're on the ground in Liberia visiting a local orphanage there. And the kids from that orphanage, the boys, happen to be playing in a soccer match that afternoon. So I go, and it's nothing like we've experienced here. Keep in mind, Liberia is the 8th poorest country in the world. Per person income on an annual basis is $530 US. Now, let that settle in for a second. Okay, that's challenging. So that's why they're the 8th poorest in the world. So people there are trying to survive. Nevertheless, I go to the soccer game as context, and these kids are out there playing 8, 9, 10 years old. And I notice a couple of things, not playing soccer myself as I grew up, but there wasn't any grass on the field. There were a couple weeds, sparsely populating the field. All the kids had orange jerseys on or T-shirts on. So you really couldn't tell which team was which. And again, never playing soccer, but I thought this has to be pretty painful. None of them had shin guards on. I thought, well, that's crazy. And there were no markings on the field, no real goals or anything like that. But kids were having the time of their life. Contrast that with back in my home state of Iowa on that very same day, September 11th, 2022, the University of Iowa is hosting Iowa State in the annual grudge match on the football field. 70,000 people in the stadium, joint athletic department budget of over $300 million. Okay, God, help me reconcile that. We've got kids here I'm sitting in front of right now who have absolutely nothing, who had no choice where they were born into this world. And you've got 70,000 people sitting in the stadium watching a couple teams of bigger kids playing a football game. It didn't seem fair. Later that afternoon, my dear wife, Chong, saw 3 boys back at the orphanage sharing a chicken bone. Now, we wouldn't let our kids eat a chicken bone. We wouldn't let our pets eat a chicken bone. But here, 3 kids were doing that for the sake of flavor from the bone. So we get back that night to where we were staying, and we get word of our second grandchild, Charlie, being born in an affluent suburb in Kansas City in a beautiful hospital. And it starts really making you reconcile in your mind, how is this fair? God, help us understand that. I make the very Western throwaway comment of, gosh, honey, someone's got to do something about this. Without missing a beat, she says, what about us? And that's how the Agape Empowerment Center started. So we went running from there, and it's just kind of how I'm wired up. If I sense a big size, God-size vision, let's go. That's how it started.
Dave, I'm curious, your time coordinating missions for the church you described as a quickly growing church. So is it safe to assume it was a pretty large church with maybe a large missions budget?
Yeah, I mean, we funded over 50 partners locally, nationally, and globally. Okay, had a significant budget to do that. About that same time, I was starting to phase out of it. And I had conversations with our senior leadership that, look, it's time for me to move on. And they were great, but they said, will you hang around and do special projects? Sure, absolutely. As long as you understand, now this conversation was following the trip to Liberia, as long as you understand, I'm going to need some flexibility to start undertaking this mission, our personal mission. And they were great, just offered great flexibility. So I still do some special projects here. And then I've got the great opportunity to have flexibility in my schedule to go about building the Agape Empowerment Center.
How did your experience in vetting ministries and really developing a philosophy and a theology
Yeah.
around missions prepare you for this next chapter of your life?
Yeah, I think three key words: structure, governance, and transparency. Not to mention, it's got to be all based around a vision from God. Okay. Children in that country are suffering. Children in a lot of areas of the world are suffering. Okay. How could we go in and make a difference with those children in the eighth poorest country in the world? To me, that took a God-sized vision. We could go in and put a Band-Aid on it. We could offer some feeding, nothing wrong with that, but it's just not the way I felt this vision was coming together. It's not the way I'm wired up. I like to think things a little bit bigger. How can we really impact a country? You think about Liberia. There's 5 million people. So think about the state of Colorado. It's about the same size, okay? Kind of a big difference in one way, though. The budget for the country of Liberia is about $800 million. The budget for the state of Colorado, about the same population base, is about $40 billion, okay? That tells you the work that needs to be done. We had personal experience with these children, this family that we met that's become part of ours. We've seen how bright these kids are, how they've benefited from the U.S. school system. And we started thinking, if we really take a big vision there, people will want to participate in it. And that's what we found so far.
So where did you start with all this? You had an idea that you were going to enter in some way. And how did that initial vision start to come together?
Yeah, it was really interesting. As we looked at other organizations in the country of Liberia, you saw some good things and you saw some not so good things. And I think this is just something, doing the missions work that I did. It's unfortunate but true. All the donated money isn't always used at its highest value. I'll leave it at that. And I think it's really important if you start something. It's the reason I mentioned before, governance, structure, transparency, really important, because we want our donors to understand that every dollar is going to be used efficiently and not to benefit anyone here in the United States of America, but only to benefit children in Liberia and others who will work around the cause over there. So as we started thinking this through, my mind went to a campus, and I don't believe it was just my mind. I think God had a big part in this. Let's do a campus and let's do something different than they've ever experienced. Because a lot of things, I think not only in Liberia, but also in a lot of third world countries, there's a lot of this is good enough for them mentality. That bothers me to no end. So oftentimes people, out of the goodness of their heart, they'll offer us, oh, here, we've got some used clothes, or use this or use that. And I'll say, would you give that to someone down the street from you? Oh, no, absolutely not. Well, then why are we doing that? Okay, let's treat these kids as, if we want them to become the best, if we want them to be Christ-centered children, well-educated, let's start treating them like the best. And not just say, you can have this hand-me-down, this hand-me-down. So that was really instrumental in the vision. It was instrumental in the vision of the campus. And so one of the coolest things in this, so bear with me, but when we came back that time from Liberia, I had a friend who was an architect, a partner in a large architectural firm here in central Iowa. And I said, Steve, can we sit down for coffee? I just want to tell you about the experience we just had. And we've got this vision and we'd just love to talk about it. So we had coffee. I described it to him. I said, would you guys ever do any pro bono work? It's one thing me to try to describe it. It's another to get a rendering. And let's show people what we're thinking about. He said, I don't know. It just so happens we have a new managing partner coming in. He says, why don't I talk to him? It's not something we normally do, but we'll get together. So a week later, we got together. I'm about 2 minutes into my very unpolished presentation. And this guy says, we'll do this for you, Dave. You don't have to sell us on it. Great. So on a cold, if anyone understands the Midwest, they'll understand what I'm saying. On a cold, dark Iowa morning in early January, we went to the office of this architectural firm. And they said they were going to do something called a charrette. I had never heard that term before, but a charrette apparently is a French term for a group of architects getting together, listening to the vision, and then drawing, okay, kind of the concept out. So my thought was, we rallied some people who were already interested in what we were doing, some already donors, and rallied them and said, you should come out and we should do this charrette with them. we were fully anticipating there'd be one, maybe two architects. We walk into their conference room, there's 20 architects. 20. You think about the value to their time. 20 architects, we were together for 2 hours. And in essence, we got in the room, they said, okay, go describe the vision. And so we started describing the vision. Within about a month, we had this beautiful rendering back of the project, which really was a godsend because then we could start talking to people about the vision and not only talking, but showing them. And people started to understand what we were trying to do. And I think they understood if they learned anything about Liberia, if they've been to any third world country, they understand what we were trying to do is a lot different than maybe what most people are doing. And that's not a criticism. It's just kind of the way we're wired up.
So, Dave, I find the name Agape Empowerment Center pretty compelling. This concept of empowering people who live in that context to not give handouts, but a hand up. And let's give our best, but really ultimately, we don't want to create a harmful cycle of dependency, which we've seen so many times. And just on this podcast, we've heard so many beautiful models of where this is executed well. How do you go about empowering the people in this community?
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of your listeners are familiar with the book When Helping Hurts. Really, it's kind of our Bible regarding missions around here. And so that was really important that we practice the tenets of When Helping Hurts. The other thing, just being out in the field and throughout the world and seeing a lot of mission partners that we're prospective partners or current partners that we're vetting. Again, you saw some ways, I think, specifically to the point you're talking about. Okay, how do you do it where you're not just handing something to people and then they take no accountability and then when it's gone, it's gone. Okay, we don't want to operate that way. We want to build well-educated, Christ-centered kids, okay, who when they matriculate out of the Agape Empowerment Center, they truly are empowered. They're empowered to go forth and change a country. If we're not doing that, what are we doing? I don't want to minimize. It's great to feed people. It's great to clothe people. All those things are really good. But I'd like to look at the whole package, the empowerment center. And I don't want to skip over the first word, agape, the perfect love, right? That's really important. And agape is just that love. It's unconditional. Okay, so we want to unconditionally love these children, but also provide them with an opportunity they may not know they even have. And that's also an important point because if you think about it, if a child in Liberia has been raised by parents who've never been outside of their village, okay, this child's now in a box. And if they've never experienced anything outside the box, how would they even know? So you think about it, a lot of teachers in a country like that, they've never been outside the box. And so there's a saying in Liberia that many of the teachers in the school system couldn't pass the tests that they're administering. That's a crime. And so we don't want to go down that direction. We want to lift these children up and also be additive within the communities that we're touching to help grow those communities. Because if we don't go beyond the campus fence, if you will, and start helping in the community from an enterprise zone, agriculture, whatever the case might be, there's not going to be anything for the kids to do after they get out of our school. And then also establish relationships with colleges, not only in Liberia, but throughout the world. That's kind of a neat thing too. So I don't know if that quite answers your question, but that's the direction we see ourselves going.
And I know you guys have been at this for a little bit of time now. I'm curious for once you started with this vision and had some of the kind of pieces coming together to where you are now, how has that vision had to change in some ways where you realized maybe things you hadn't considered or, traps to be aware of as you try to execute this well?
Yeah, we're kind of facing that right now, quite frankly. So we're getting ready to go over to Liberia and break ground for the campus. Cool, right? Now, there's a cost to doing that. Okay, there's a global cost. And the way I think, it's like, okay, let's go do the whole thing. Now, fundraising might dictate something different, maybe more of an incremental approach. And so we really understand we might have to do this in phases. Phase one is a preschool, K through 3, the worship center, and a cafeteria, something along that line. Then you're going to, over time, as we want to develop our own culture, we'll continue to add other grades. So the way the plan calls for right now is we'll have that pre-K, K through 3, then the 4 through 6, and the 7 through 9, and the 10 through 12 eventually, but we'll populate those over time. In addition, I didn't mention this earlier, but there's 100,000 estimated, 100,000 orphans in Liberia. Again, biblically, we're commanded, right, to take care of the widows and orphans. We need to do something about that also. And so we're going to build some dormitories on our campus where we'll invite orphans from throughout the country. They don't have to be right there in our backyard, but we're going to invite orphans throughout the country in, and then they'll take part in our school system. But most importantly, and I think this gets back to the earlier comment about when helping hurts, we want to establish a culture. So if we just open the gates tomorrow, K through 12, and invited students in who are already in other school systems and everything like that, those cultures are all going to permeate what we're trying to do. We'd rather start them very young and then build, adding a grade each year. So by the time we've got our first graduating class, there's a clear culture on that campus. It's a Christ-centered culture, a vision of excellence that when those kids walk out of there as young adults now, they can offer the community, their country, something that maybe other kids couldn't before.
So as you took this vision into reality, how did you go about selecting a piece of property, and what does that look like, and what buildings and what elements make up the campus?
Yeah, well, we were blessed early in the process back in, again, we really got started in early first quarter of 2023 after our visit in 2022. We had the opportunity to meet the president of the Liberian Senate, Senator Naomi Karnga Lawrence, just a wonderful woman. Based on that relationship developing over time, she's in a specific county in Liberia. I'm not expecting most of your listeners to be familiar, but it's Grand Bassa County. It's a beautiful part of the world. You know, if anyone's, just to give the vision, if anyone's spent any time in Hawaii, it almost feels that way. You know, it's on the ocean. There's a port there. You can just imagine what could happen there. But so as we met her and started discussing with her the vision, I think she got pretty excited too. Backtrack, back at the end of 2023, right before Christmas, I had heard that their recently elected president, Joseph Boakai, was going to be in the United States. I thought, well, I've got this rendering. I want to go meet him. So I flew out to Philadelphia/New Jersey. Some Liberian Americans arranged an opportunity for me to meet with him, and I showed him the rendering, and I'll never forget this. He pounded on it with his finger, and he said, "We need this." And I said, "Thank you. That's what I was hoping to hear." And so he's been a part of this too. In fact, when we go back to do groundbreaking, we're trying to work arrangements that he can be at the groundbreaking ceremony. And of course, Senator Lawrence will be there. But that was really an important piece. I don't want to overly inflate the value of politicians. And we all know what I mean by that. You know, elections happen and then things can change. But it's really important that they are on your side and not working against you. And they've been great so far. They've been supportive. And again, so the land comes about, in answer to your question, she arranged for 15 acres to be donated to us in Grand Bassa County, just beautiful, beautiful acres of land that we can build our campus, this progressive campus.
Yeah, that is amazing how details that are totally out of your control can come together when God is putting the right pieces together. Now, you mentioned when helping hurts a couple times. One of the core tenets in that is about local leadership. And, you know, I know you guys are still kind of in the early stages of things now, but I'd be interested to know what you have learned from the local community there in terms of, hey, this might work in this country, but that doesn't work here because of this way that our community is. And then how you plan to continue to incorporate and build that local community involvement as you go forward.
Yeah, we were fortunate. Another person we got introduced to, this is really funny. This is a God moment. So there's a gentleman over in Liberia. His name is Curtis, okay, who, believe it or not, used to live in Des Moines, Iowa. Okay, so he's a Liberian citizen, okay, was over here, worked here for a few years. Another Liberian American friend of mine here in central Iowa said, you know, you guys are going over there a lot now. You need to get to know Curtis. The president of Liberia had recruited Curtis to come over, which they oftentimes do with members of the diaspora. Come back, bring some of your expertise. So Curtis went back to work in the Ministry of Gender Equity, and I forget what the rest of the title of that is. So he's right underneath the minister of that department, personally recruited by the president of the country. Okay, so Curtis is a great guy to have on the ground. So we converse often whenever we're there. He takes care of us while we're over there. That led to us finding the future principal for our school, a guy by the name of Lawrence Tua, who's got just incredible academic credentials and an incredible heart for Christ and just wants to be a part of this thing. So he's finishing up the rest of his grad school right now. That's kind of cool. The interesting thing, though, to circle back to your question of how do you involve the locals? How do you do it right so you're not excluding them from this process? It's a really interesting question. It's one thing to read it on the pages of a book. It's something else when you think about eighth poorest country in the world. These people, when they go to bed at night, they're not thinking about what I'm going to do 2 months from now, a month from now, or a week from now. They're thinking about survival. That's a little bit of a different animal than doing it, for instance, in an inner city here in the United States. It's different. There's no net to capture it, a safety net for people. It just doesn't exist. And so we probably have to turn back the clock a little bit and probably do a little bit more up front. But over time, we want to train people to come alongside of us because we know we can't do this forever. And unless we do a good job of transitioning this to local ownership, if you will, and by ownership, I mean really mentally, psychologically, emotionally owning this, okay? And understanding everything we do, we want to be the best. We don't ever want to settle for, well, we've always done it this way. No, we just don't want to do that. And so far, I've been amazed at the reception between government officials, local officials, tribal officials, and just people we've gotten to know. They love that because it's a different story than they've been hearing for a long time. It's always been, take the hand-me-down, that's good enough for you guys.
Dave, have you seen this model of a campus or a full community work in other contexts?
Yeah, I've seen parts of it. Okay, different parts here and there. We had a partner over in Uganda who does a pretty good job with young ladies over there in providing them a safe, healthy, uplifting environment. There's a few things that I'd probably tweak from what they do that we will do a little bit differently. I've seen in Ghana, we had a pretty strong partner there that's doing a lot on the theological side with training seminarians and missionaries. I think that could become a part of what we're doing over time. So we're excited for that. One of the beauties of doing the missions work that I've done here, it's given me exposure to all these other mission partners. Okay. Now, where are partnership opportunities with those? So for instance, I just mentioned this gentleman and this pastor in Ghana, West Africa. When we do the groundbreaking, he's going to come to that. That's important. It's important for Liberia to know other people are seeing and hearing. When you go to Liberia, people are generally grateful you're there. Sometimes that's inexplicable to me. If you knew anything about the history between Liberia and the United States, it's a really good relationship, but it's also a strained relationship in many ways. Just remember, Liberia was settled by freed American slaves. So that's the history. Well, there's a lot of challenges in that history over time, but it's still a wonderful relationship. I think it could be much stronger. And I think now is a great time to take advantages of some inroads with our current administration that they're doing in parts of Africa, especially as it relates to trade, mineral development, things like that. I think there's some opportunities. And I think if we keep our eyes and ears open and our connectivity and our networking alive, a lot can happen in a positive way in Liberia and specifically at the Agape Empowerment Center.
You've mentioned a lot of different components and pieces to this plan. I'd love to just hear, as best you can vision it now, which I know is probably going to constantly change, what would you love to see in 5-10 years from now in terms of if everything has gone well?
Yeah. Joy and hope, I think, are the easy catchwords, okay? Really important because when I look in children's faces right now in the country of Liberia, I don't see joy and hope. I see sadness. I see fatigue, all of those things. You think about it. Let me give you an anecdote if I could. So the first trip over there, we're at this one orphanage and they're having a worship service there. And my wife nudges me about halfway through the service. She says, do you notice those children, really young children? they're perfectly behaved. They're not moving at all. And again, these were 3 to 5 year olds, something like that. And then about 30 seconds later, she nudges me and she goes, it's not a behavioral issue. They're malnutritioned. They don't have anything in them. They're just stoic, in their face, and they can't react to anything. So what do I see down the road in 5 or 10 years? I see children with joy and hope in their lives, with an outcome that maybe they start having a little more control over, understanding the relationship with Christ, how important that is in their lives and how that can change everything for them. I think if we do that, I think if we bring in some other methodologies to the campus, and to the point of the campus, we've got 15 acres, okay? We can build the entire K through 12 school. We'll have a visitor center. We may have a seminary training sort of facility before this all gets said and done, based on the connection I visited with a few minutes ago with the pastor from Ghana. We'll have a clinic there. That'll be kind of important for the community. And we hope to build around it enterprise zones of some sort, because if we just educate kids and they get through the 12th grade, and in current Liberia, they get out of the 12th grade, they're well educated, there's a big question. Then what? What do you do? It's not like here, I'm well educated. Well, I automatically go to a 4-year college. Okay. And then I know there's a job waiting for me when I get out. That's not the situation. So how can we impact the community we're going in? And I think this is what excites some of the political people we're dealing with. Do we have the capacity to create something beyond the campus walls and start bringing some influence and network connections in to help grow this thing beyond just an educational institution?
Dave, how would you say that this experience over the last few years has deepened yours and Chong's faith?
It's taught me so much. My dear wife, again, I married up, guys. It's so obvious sometimes. And I'm a self-admitted German control freak. Okay. I just like to take something and then just go with it and run with it and make it happen. And that's been kind of the story of my corporate career and just kind of what I did. Well, guess what? That doesn't always work in a third world country. Okay. And sometimes you really do have to let go and let God, right? And learning that, I absolutely have no control. I think I do, but I don't. And at the end of the day, this is God's plan or it's not. I hope to be able to help implement it. And the other thing my dear wife reminds me of from time to time, we may be dead for 20 years before the full impact of this thing is ever realized. But that's okay, because if we're planting the seed, it's no different with faith in our children, right? If we plant the seed, we don't know when it's going to get watered and when it's going to grow. Well, the same thing here. We don't know. But we'd like to think if we plant seeds in fertile soil, it's going to grow over time. So I think it's a life lesson. It's a theological lesson. It's a God lesson to both of us that we have no control. We'll keep pushing ahead until someone tells us to stop. We don't see that happening. Okay. And we think if God stays in the center of this process, it will prosper.
I'm curious, and I know this is probably a little too early stage to really know in much detail, but over time, what would be your hope for the sustainability, especially in terms of the resources required to operate a campus and whole operation like this?
That's a great question. Let me get specific, okay? So the capital portion of this is a $2 to $3 million raise. If I were building the same campus 10 blocks from where I'm sitting right now, it's a $20 to $30 million project. Over there, it's not. Now, I don't want anyone who's listening to that saying, well, that must mean they're building kind of rundown, not really efficient property. Not the case. We found an incredible builder in Liberia. Pricing's different. It's absolutely different. It's 10 cents on the dollar. And so we can build a magnificent campus in that price range. Now, fast forward. That part's done. Now, how do you operate it? Well, right now, based on our best estimate, you're only looking at about $500,000 a year to operate the campus. Over time, there's got to be several components to that. Obviously, there's a fundraising component. I clearly believe and adamantly believe there always has to be a tuition component. There also has to be, beyond a tuition component, a financial aid component, for those who can't, unless, and this goes back to when helping hurts, right? Unless people have skin in the game, it won't be appreciated. The campus will be, we could build a beautiful state-of-the-art campus, and you go back 2 years later, and I've seen this in my travels around the globe, you go back and you see what just happened. Where do those computers go that were here? We can't afford to have that happen because we're putting, and it's not about us, but we do put a lot of our credibility on the line with prospective donors, friends, about supporting this thing. And we try to assure them that every dollar they invest is going to be a well-invested dollar. And if we continue to earn that trust, we have to continue to deliver on that promise.
Now, you mentioned a couple of times this idea of enterprise zones.
Yeah.
And I know that's not an immediate focus, but explain a little bit more of that vision and what exactly you mean by that and what that could look like down the line.
Yeah, let's take agriculture as an example. I happen to live in the state of Iowa. Many would consider Iowa the breadbasket of the world. Okay, so there's a lot of agricultural interest around here. Whether the seed entities, equipment entities, a research institution 30 miles up the road, it's at the forefront of agriculture in our world. Okay, to me, there's a lot of connectivity possibilities there. If we start introducing some of these people in, and oh, by the way, another partner of ours is Convoy of Hope, who's done some great agricultural work in some communities in Africa right now with smaller scale equipment. You can't suddenly go in with a huge combine and harvest a crop over there. Okay. So they've figured out a way to do this. So for smaller farmers and things like that, we've got to figure that out, what that could look like. I mentioned before, where we're building the campus is next to a town called Buchanan, which is a port city. Well, over time, guess what can happen to that port? It can become a trading zone of some sort. Right now, Liberia is exporting very little. They're importing everything. So first of all, let's feed the people in the country through agriculture. But what are other manufacturing entities? We know manufacturing is exported all throughout the world. Okay. Where can Liberia fit into that equation? I don't have the answer today, but I think there are ways that we can accommodate, we can act as an accelerator, and especially if some of these folks who might have that capacity to do it and take a risk in another country, if they know they've got a potential employment pool out there that's going to be well-educated, Christ-centered, amen. We've got something then. I get pretty excited about that because probably well after I'm off this earth, this thing could be humming along in such a way that I can't even imagine today. And here's the other cool thing. This is a template. If we do this well, there's no reason we can't do it throughout the country, or how about throughout West Africa? This is a template. And I believe if done well, it can change the way people think.
You mentioned that you have a partnership with Convoy of Hope. What does partnership and collaboration look like for you?
Well, so for instance, when we go over to break ground in this next 2 weeks, Convoy of Hope is joining us in making an announcement that we're into a feeding program for the children in that area for the next year. So what does that mean? I think it sets the stage very well. So we can start working with pastors in that area to start a feeding program. I'm just throwing out ideas right now. That could be once a week. Let's say get in the habit of Wednesday night becoming church night, okay, where kids come together, they get fed. That draws people. We all know that, okay? Even here in a suburb in Des Moines, Iowa, we know if we feed people, they come, okay? So let's do that. Let's feed people, and these kids need it. So if we start doing that, it's a great way to start building community, building relationships in that community. We think that's important. So that to me is a partnership with Convoy, okay? I mentioned the gentleman, the pastor from Ghana. If we can figure out a way to partner that, is there a way that we can help train, well theologically trained seminarians, perhaps in our campus, that can help spread the gospel throughout Liberia? Again, it's a Christian country, 80% Christian, but I'm probably going outside my theological boundaries here, but I think a little work could be done on spreading the love of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I'm curious, from your experience there over the last couple of years, what is your experience of the faith climate in there? So it's interesting to know that it's 80% Christian. What does that look like in kind of normal community?
I think it looks like a community that's more concerned right now about survival. Yeah, so it's so different than any of us on this podcast are thinking about, okay, or what we experience, okay. Again, if you're going to bed at night thinking, am I going to be alive in the morning? I haven't eaten for 3 or 4 days or whatever the case might be, or I might have drank contaminated water, all of those things that are present in their world. I don't think you're thinking oftentimes about your relationship with Jesus. I think people have an inherent faith in them. They have to, because I don't know how you'd lay your head on the pillow at night if you didn't, if knowing, I don't know if I'm going to survive this. I mean, keep in mind, this country's been through 2 civil wars, an Ebola crisis, and COVID like the rest of the world. They're rebounding from all of that right now and making some progress and headway. And I think this maybe revival of Christianity can change things even in a more transformative way.
Well, you have certainly got a lot going on right now and a huge vision going forward. I'm curious, as you think about the future, what are you most excited about coming on the horizon?
I've got both a personal and a professional answer to that. Okay, the professional one is we want to see this campus completed, and we understand fully. I've done a lot of fundraising in my life. There's the old pastor story, right? We know we've got the money. It's there. Unfortunately, it's in your pockets right now. Okay. So we know it's out there. We know there's a great deal of wealth. There's going to be a great transfer of wealth and all that. A good fundraising expert friend of mine said, Dave, all you need to do is just keep telling the story. And that's all we try to do is tell the story, because when people hear the story so far, we've had about 200 people rally around this, okay, with donations big and small. That doesn't happen by accident. I think the story is powerful. So I get most excited about this campus being online, seeing a couple hundred kids running onto it when you cut the ribbon the first day, and seeing the joy in their faces, and knowing that we've done the structural work behind it, that we've got the appropriately educated teachers that really can pass the tests they're administering. We've got the leadership in place there who understands that we're going to treat every child as a child of God. If we do that, and they're committed to simply being the best, we know we're going to make great headway. Personally, my dear wife and I understand this, I think, pretty well. We have a choice, I think, in our country generally. We always hear about retirement, right? And I've been blessed throughout my career, and I have a lot of friends who say, why don't you just retire? Well, I try to change that quickly and say, I'm not going to retire, I'm going to refire. The image that we've created, the vision in this country is we've created a selfish vision of older people. And it's retire, hop on the back of a boat, put your white linens on, toast a Chardonnay overlooking an island with a sunset. And that's success in retirement. Well, I disagree with that. I think we need to finish well. There's nothing that says we have to stop. Health or a diagnosis or something like that, I understand that. But as long as I'm able, as long as my wife is able, we're going to keep going until someone tells us to stop. And I don't see that happening anytime soon. And it just feels God ordained. So why wouldn't we? People have often asked, why are you doing this? Well, if it's truly God ordained, you can't say no. There's no choice. So we're going to keep going and finish well.
And if you do say no, you get swallowed by a fish. So it doesn't work out so well.
Yeah, a big one, apparently.
Best case scenario.
Yes.
Well, I'm excited to see what God continues to do through you, the rest of the team, and through all the team you have on the ground in Liberia, through all the connections that He's brought beside you. For anybody that's listening and wants to learn more about all that you have going on, where can they find more information?
Yeah, please go to our website, agapeempowermentcenter.org, agapeempowermentcenter.org. On there's my personal phone number. Don't hesitate to call me. As you guys can probably tell by now, I love talking about this. It's such a passion. And if we can I did a count recently. This was kind of cool. I think I'm right on this. I should double check, but I think we've gotten contributions from 17 different states already. That's kind of cool because we haven't done a big marketing campaign or anything like that. But if we keep telling the story, so if someone goes to agapeempowermentcenter.org, you'll see the story. You'll see a lot of things that we talked about today. You'll see just a quick mention. I talked structure before. We were really careful in how we structured this. You'll see it on the website. We have a governing board, really important, okay, because we want to be good stewards of donor dollars. We also have, I found there were a lot of younger people who had a great skill set, but might not have the monetary resources yet at this point in their career, but wanted to be involved. Well, we created this advisory committee. A guy who's a front-end software engineer, I think I'm saying that right, for Airbnb, designed our website for us. A young woman who's an attorney at the largest law firm in central Iowa did all of our legal documents for us. Another lady who's got a great, flourishing PR firm did all of our logo development for us, all pro bono. That was kind of important. It was a great way to bring young people into this. Then the final piece that's kind of funny, people will see when they go to the website, we have an honorary cabinet. And I don't know quite where we came up with this, but after I thought about it, it seemed like a good idea. Someone suggested to me, you should do something to honor famous Liberian Americans. And I jokingly said, I don't know any. And they said, well, do a little research. So I went and Googled famous Liberian Americans. And the very first person that came up is a guy by the name of Wilmot Collins. None of you have heard of him. Some of you might on the West Coast. But Wilmot, just think about the optics of this. Wilmot is the mayor of Helena, Montana. Now, we know the demographics of Helena. Wilmot's a Liberian American, and he's the mayor of that community and will be running for higher office. I know that in a recent discussion with him. I called Wilmot, introduced myself, said, here's what we're trying to do. He says, oh, amen. We need this. And I said, great. You want to be involved? I said, I just want to use your photo on our honorary cabinet so it leads other people to think and talk about it. So that went from him to, I think we now have 8 honorary cabinet members, including, if you're a college football fan, we've got a running back from Iowa State University, Liberian American, who's on the Doak Walker watch list for top running backs in the country. We've got a guy who developed an incredible CPA firm out of Pennsylvania, another Liberian American. We've got the former Minister of Agriculture in Liberia, who's part of this. We've got the current Minister of Transport, who's on our honorary cabinet. It goes on and on. It was just kind of a cool thing to honor people and have them, in case anyone asks, say, this is a great deal. You ought to support it.
Well, Dave, as we get to the end of our time together, I want to leave some space for our manager's minute, which is how we end every episode. And this is just a practical suggestion for our listeners on how they can step into their role as stewards and manage God's wealth wisely. So, Dave, do you have a suggestion today?
So I've managed a lot of donor dollars over the years through the church that I work at, raising money over the years for different causes here and there. And I always suggest this. Look at your philanthropic return on investment. Really important. We can all feel reasonably good when we write a check, whether it's $100 or $1 million, to a cause. But look at the ROI on that thing. What's going to develop out of that? And that's what I get passionate about with what we're doing and how it could impact donors and what they're doing in their lives. It's very rare that you can say to a donor with a straight face, in all honesty, I can give you the highest philanthropic return on investment of any nonprofit in the world, because no one else is going to offer the chance to literally change a country. So looking at that ROI to me is really important. And as it relates to the Agape Empowerment Center, I think it's a match made in heaven.
Well, thanks so much for joining us, Dave. This has been a fantastic conversation. God is clearly on the move, and you have a lot of pieces coming into place right now. And it's actually really fun talking through these stages of ministry work and trying to put a lot of the pieces together. We talked to a lot of ministries who have been around for 40, 50 years, and you see it all in retrospect, but to be able to see it live in the moment, I think is powerful. And to see what it's really like to walk beside God as he carries the whole plan and just gives you the part that he wants you to take one step at a time. So thanks for sharing that with us today. And we're excited to see what he's got in store.
Thanks to both of you. And thank you for your ministry. I think it's impactful throughout the country.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to the show, guys. If you want to find any references or links from today's show, you can always find them in our show notes at finishlinepledge.com/episode 169. Before we finish up, I have a quick question for you. Have you ever stopped to answer the question, how much is enough? A financial finish line is designed to help you do just that. Our 90-day Finish Line Pledge breaks down the process into 3 easy steps. Step 1, define how much is enough for you and your family to spend in a single month, and use that as your monthly spending budget for 90 days. Step 2, as God provides money to manage, set aside any margin outside of your finish line into a separate bank account. Step 3, after 90 days, explore the million ways you can use the margin you've set aside to create joy, purpose, and impact in God's kingdom. Want to learn more? Check out our website at finishlinepledge.com. That's all we have for today. We'll see you next time.